A lot of African countries are banning raw material exports to these foreign nations that have been looting from the continent for years.
Congolese authorities announced a 4-month ban on cobalt exports in February this year in a bid to regain control over prices and stabilize the market.
The Democratic Republic of Congo just banned cobalt exports. Zimbabwe banned raw lithium. Namibia banned unprocessed minerals.
Because I banned the export of unprocessed gold. I said any gold which is not processed should not be exported. I banned the export of unprocessed minerals, including tin and all the other minerals, and copper. And because of that, investors were forced to come here because they cannot take our raw materials free from here.
This country shouldn't be where it is. This country shouldn't be in debt. There's no way. It is unjustifiable. I cannot, by the life in me, understand why we are where we are. I cannot. I refuse to embrace this unpleasant reality. I refuse. I am a persistent objector to this conventional and mundane existence. And yet we are sitting on trillions of dollars of mineral wealth. But it doesn't work. The Washington consensus is absolute nonsense. Don't come to me and tell me government must not get involved in the arena of production. No, I don't care from what school of economics you get it from, Chicago school, whatever. No, it's absolute nonsense. It doesn't work. And it will not work here. So let's try something we may even not know. Because the knowledge economy is an experimental economy.
President Trump made the claim that the U.S. trade deficit is caused by other countries abusing the United States. That if the U.S. is running a trade deficit, as it does with more than 100 countries, that this is somehow the fault of those other countries. Well,
we are in the middle of a rare earths resource war, and allegedly, we're just weeks away from a US defense crisis. So let's break this down. First, what are rare earths? Rare earths consist of 17 special minerals that are mined and processed into things like strong magnets. And then these magnets are used to power our AI chips, our EV cars, our fighter jets, things of that sort. And here's the issue.
Well, I think you should start at a much higher level. Okay? We are in Davos at the World Economic Forum. And the Trump administration and myself, we are here to make a very clear point. Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America. It's a failed policy. It is what the WEF has stood for, which is export, offshore, far shore, find the cheapest labor in the world, and the world is a better place for it. The fact is, it has left America behind. It has left the American workers behind. And what we are here to say is that America First is a different model, one that we encourage other countries to consider, which is that our workers come first. We can have policies that impact our workers. Sovereignty is your borders. You're entitled to have borders. You shouldn't offshore your medicine. You shouldn't offshore your semiconductors. You shouldn't offshore your entire industrial base and have it be hollowed out beneath you. You should not be dependent for that which is fundamental to your sovereignty on any other nation. And if you're going to be dependent on someone, it darn well better be your best allies. Okay? And so that is a different way of thinking. It is completely different than the WEF. I viewed the WEF as not a flagpole in the middle, but in fact, they are the flag. Whichever way the wind blew, so it blew. You should have solar, you should have wind. Why are you going to do solar and wind? Why would Europe agree to be net zero in 2030 when they don't make a battery? They don't make a battery. So if they go 2030, they are deciding to be subservient.
The shift in Africa's raw material policy is forcing the United States to confront a reality that had long been postponed. For years, supply chains were treated as permanent, almost natural systems. Minerals would always flow, prices would always stabilize, and political decisions in distant regions would never seriously disrupt American. Technological progress, that assumption is now gone. The restriction of raw material exports from Africa has revealed just how fragile the foundations of global technology truly are. At the center of this transformation is the recognition that minerals are no longer commodities alone. They are strategic assets. They shape the future of energy, defense, artificial intelligence, transportation, and economic power. Countries that control them are discovering they have leverage that rivals military or financial influence. Africa's decision to prioritize domestic processing and local value creation signals that the era of passive resource extraction has ended. Across the continent, a new model is emerging. Governments are insisting that minerals must be refined locally, batteries assembled domestically, and technology ecosystems built near the source. This is not simply about profit, it is about sovereignty. When Africa exports raw materials, it exports potential jobs, knowledge, and industrial growth. When it processes those materials at home, it captures the future. This logic is now shaping policy in ways that directly affect American tech companies. The immediate impact is seen in production timelines. American manufacturers accustomed to just-in-time delivery now face delays. Contracts that once spanned decades are being renegotiated. Long-standing supply routes are being replaced by new partnerships that favor regional processing. The result is a restructuring of global production that moves value closer to the source of materials. For Africa, this is development. For the United States, it is disruption. The challenge is magnified by the scale of demand. The transition to electric vehicles, renewable energy, and AI-driven infrastructure has dramatically increased the need for minerals. Every wind turbine requires tons of copper and rare earths. Every electric vehicle battery demands lithium, cobalt, and nickel. Every data center depends on metals and materials that must be mined and refined. As demand surges, control over supply becomes more valuable than innovation itself. American companies are responding, but not fast enough to offset the structural change. Domestic mining projects face environmental opposition, regulatory delays, and political resistance. Recycling programs offer promise, but they cannot meet near-term demand. Strategic stockpiles are limited, and alternatives remain years away from scale. In the meantime, Africa's policies are reshaping global access in real time. The global response to Africa's strategy has been uneven. Some countries are adjusting their supply chains, building processing plants, and negotiating new trade frameworks. Others are attempting to maintain the old system through diplomacy and pressure. The United States has largely pursued a mixed approach, investing in alternative sources while seeking to preserve access to African minerals through partnership agreements. However, these efforts face a fundamental limitation. African nations are no longer negotiating from weakness. This shift is psychological as much as economic. For decades, Africa was viewed as a supplier, not a partner. Today, it is asserting itself as an industrial actor. That change in perception is altering negotiations, investments, and global alliances. When Africa chooses to process its own minerals, it is sending a signal that it intends to participate fully in the technological age, not just support it from the margins. The technology sector is beginning to recognize this reality. Companies that once focused solely on securing raw materials are now investing in local processing facilities, training programs, and infrastructure. These investments reflect a new understanding. Access to minerals now requires alignment with the development goals of producing countries. This represents a profound change in how global tech operates. At the same time, Africa's industrial rise is creating competition in unexpected places. Battery manufacturing, once concentrated in a few regions, is spreading. Processing hubs are emerging near mining centers. Research institutions are forming partnerships that keep expertise within the continent. Over time, this could lead to African firms competing directly in markets once dominated by American and European companies. The export of raw materials is being replaced by the export of finished and semi-finished products. This is not a zero-sum game, but it is a redistribution of power. The United States still holds advantages in research, capital markets, and advanced manufacturing, but those advantages are less decisive when access to materials is constrained. The tech war is shifting from innovation alone to a combination of innovation and resource security. In this environment, countries that control supply chains gain influence over those that depend on them. The geopolitical implications are significant. When Africa controls mineral exports, it influences global energy transitions, military readiness, and economic stability. This leverage allows African governments to negotiate better terms, diversify partnerships, and resist external pressure. The old pattern of dependency is being replaced by interdependence and, in some cases, by leverage in the opposite direction. For the United States, this is a strategic wake-up call. The assumption that technology leadership can be maintained without resource security is no longer sustainable. Policymakers are now forced to rethink trade strategy, industrial policy, and foreign relations through the lens of materials. This has led to renewed interest in alliances, regional partnerships, and long-term agreements that go beyond short-term procurement. However, the deeper challenge is cultural. For decades, global trade operated on the idea that markets would solve everything. Africa's export restrictions challenge that idea directly. They demonstrate that political decisions can override market forces when national development is at stake. This reality forces American institutions to adapt to a world where economics and politics are inseparable. Africa's transformation also changes the narrative of global development. The continent is no longer waiting for technology to arrive. It is building it from the ground up. Industrial zones, processing facilities, and research centers are creating ecosystems that attract investment and talent. This process is uneven and complex, but it is moving forward with momentum that is difficult to reverse. As Africa builds capacity, the global tech landscape becomes more multipolar. Innovation is no longer concentrated in a handful of regions. Production is no longer separated from resource extraction. Value chains are shortening, and power is decentralizing. In this new world, America's dominance is challenged not by decline, but by competition from regions that were once excluded from industrialization. The tech war, in this sense, is evolving. It is no longer about who invents first, but who controls the entire journey from ground to device. Africa's decision to cut off raw material exports is a declaration that it intends to own more of that journey. The United States must now decide whether to resist this shift or adapt to it. Adaptation will require new thinking. It will require viewing Africa not as a source of inputs, but as a partner in production. It will require investment in shared infrastructure, education, and technology transfer. It will require diplomacy that respects sovereignty rather than assuming access. Most of all, it will require time. Because building new supply chains is slow and expensive. In the short term, the United States will face higher costs, supply uncertainty, and strategic challenges. In the long term, it may emerge with more resilient systems and stronger partnerships. The outcome is not predetermined, but the direction of change is clear. The age of unlimited access to global resources is over. Africa's raw material policies are not anti-American. They are pro-African. They reflect a global shift towards self-determination that is reshaping trade, technology, and power. The United States is not losing the tech war because Africa is rising. It is losing ground because the rules of the game have changed. The world is entering a new phase of globalization, one defined by strategic resources, regional production, and political negotiation. In this world, leadership requires cooperation, not dominance. Africa has made its move, and the ripple effects are now spreading across every sector that depends on technology. The tech war is no longer fought in code alone. It is fought in mines, factories, and policy rooms. It is fought through partnerships, investments, and long-term vision. Africa's decision to control its raw materials is reshaping that battlefield, and the United States must now decide how to respond. The conclusion is unavoidable. The future of technology will be shaped as much by geography as by genius. As Africa steps into its role as a producer, not just a supplier, the global balance shifts. America still has the tools to compete, but it must first accept a new reality, one in which access is negotiated, power is shared, and the foundations of technology are no longer taken for granted. If the United States adapts, the tech war becomes a collaboration. If it resists, it becomes a constraint. Africa has already chosen its path. The rest of the world is now adjusting to it. For decades, the foundation of America's technological dominance has rested on a hidden pillar far from Silicon Valley or Washington: access to raw materials. Every smartphone, electric vehicle, data center, satellite, and military system depends on minerals that do not come from American soil: cobalt, lithium, manganese, rare earths. Graphite, copper, and nickel are the silent inputs of the digital age. As Africa moves to restrict raw material exports and prioritize local processing, the consequences are beginning to ripple across the global tech economy, and the United States is feeling the impact more than it expected. The global tech war was never only about software, patents, or innovation. It has always been about supply chains. For years, American firms enjoyed a system in which African nations exported raw materials cheaply, while value creation happened elsewhere. This arrangement is now breaking down, not through conflict, but through policy. Across the continent, governments are passing export restrictions, processing requirements, and local content laws designed to end the historical pattern of resource extraction without development. What was once a quiet shift has become a structural transformation, and it is rewriting the rules of global technology production. Africa holds an estimated 30–40% of the world's critical minerals. It dominates cobalt supply, controls major lithium deposits, holds vast rare earth potential, and sits on enormous copper reserves that power everything from electric grids to AI infrastructure. In the past, these resources flowed outward in raw form. Today, African leaders are increasingly asking why they should export value when they can build it at home. As new refineries, processing plants, and battery factories rise across the continent, the old supply chain model is collapsing. For American tech companies, the consequences are immediate and long-term. The cost of securing critical minerals is rising, contracts are becoming less predictable, and dependency on intermediaries is increasing. More importantly, access is no longer guaranteed. Export bans and quotas have introduced uncertainty into a system that once relied on stability. In the tech industry, uncertainty is more damaging than price increases because it disrupts planning, investment, and scale. The electric vehicle sector is one of the first to feel the pressure. Batteries require vast quantities of cobalt, lithium, nickel, and graphite. Africa supplies most of the world's cobalt and holds major lithium potential. When African governments require minerals to be processed locally before export, American manufacturers face delays and higher costs. At the same time, African countries are forming partnerships to build their own battery value chains, reducing the amount of raw material available to foreign buyers. This does not eliminate American access overnight, but it changes the balance of power. Semiconductor production is also exposed. While chips are manufactured in advanced facilities, the materials inside them originate from global sources, many of which trace back to Africa. Rare earths, tantalum, and copper are essential for electronics, defense systems, and AI hardware. Any disruption in supply slows production and raises costs. When Africa chooses to refine, process, or retain these materials, the impact reaches deep into the heart of the American tech ecosystem. The shift is not happening in isolation. African nations are aligning industrial policy with long-term development strategies. Instead of exporting ore, they are building smelters. Instead of shipping minerals abroad, they are negotiating technology transfer, local manufacturing, and equity participation. These policies are supported by global partners who see Africa not just as a source of raw materials, but as the next industrial frontier. As new trade alliances emerge, the United States faces competition not only for resources but for influence. America's tech war challenges were already mounting. Competition from Asia, supply chain disruptions during global crises, and rising costs had weakened the old model. Africa's new resource strategy accelerates these pressures. It reveals a structural vulnerability that innovation alone cannot fix. No amount of software leadership can replace physical materials. No AI breakthrough can function without minerals to power servers, data centers, and devices. The strategic implications extend beyond commerce. Military technology depends on the same minerals that power civilian tech. Advanced radar systems, communications equipment, aerospace components, and missile guidance systems all rely on rare earths and specialty metals. When supply chains tighten, national security planners take notice. Africa's decision to control its resources is therefore not just an economic move but a geopolitical one. For decades, America assumed that global markets would guarantee access to resources. That assumption is no longer valid. Countries with strategic minerals are realizing that control equals leverage. Africa is no longer content to play a passive role in global production. It is asserting agency, rewriting contracts, and redefining its position in the global economy. At the same time, Africa's industrial push is attracting investment that once flowed exclusively to traditional manufacturing hubs. Battery plants, processing facilities, and technology parks are emerging in regions that were previously dismissed as resource-only economies. This creates local jobs, builds skills, and locks value into the continent. For American companies, it also creates competition. Africa is no longer just a supplier. It is becoming a rival in certain sectors. The tech war is therefore entering a new phase. It is no longer about who designs the best product, but who controls the inputs that make production possible. Africa's resource policies are shifting the battlefield from laboratories to mines, refineries, and industrial zones. In this new environment, America's advantage in innovation is challenged by its disadvantage in materials. Efforts are underway in the United States to respond. Domestic mining is expanding, recycling programs are increasing, and strategic partnerships are being negotiated. However, building alternative supply chains takes time, money, and political consensus. In the short term, dependence remains. In the long term, the world is moving toward a more fragmented resource system, where access is negotiated, not assumed. The transformation also highlights a deeper global change. The era when developing regions exported raw materials and imported finished goods is ending. Africa's export restrictions are part of a larger trend toward resource nationalism, industrial sovereignty, and economic self-determination. Similar policies are emerging in Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. The United States faces a future where supply chains are shorter, more political, and less predictable. In this new reality, tech leadership requires more than innovation. It requires diplomacy, partnership, and respect for the priorities of resource-holding nations. Africa's decision to cut off raw material exports is not an attack on America, but a declaration of independence from a system that no longer serves its people. The unintended consequence is that America must now compete in a world where materials are power and power is shared. As Africa builds processing plants, battery factories, and industrial ecosystems, the global tech balance is shifting. America still leads in many areas, but its dominance is no longer unchallenged. The tech war is becoming a contest of resources, relationships, and resilience, not just ideas. What is happening now is not a sudden collapse, but a slow structural shift. The United States is not losing the tech war overnight, but it is no longer winning it by default. Africa's decision to control its resources marks a turning point in global economics, one that forces America to rethink how technology is built, who controls its foundations, and what leadership means in a world where raw materials are no longer freely available. The future of the tech war will not be decided in boardrooms alone. It will be decided in mines, refineries, factories, and trade negotiations. Africa has entered that arena with a clear strategy, and the world's most powerful tech economies must now adapt to a reality where access is earned, not guaranteed.